Hello. Welcome back to Animal Corner. Today, I'm going to talk about these kids that are in Scientology, and it's pretty tragic. Children in Scientology are always seen as picture perfect for years when people had no idea what Scientology was doing. When they are inside those infamous blue buildings, they are being abused, and this is on a daily basis. You would think they are having a wonderful life when you see them in person, but in reality, they don't have a good life while they're in Scientology. In that criminal organization, their parents are not even there to see it happen. There are parents usually in another city or state while they're in while they're while they are working there. These parents are being so irresponsible, leaving them in an organization like Scientology. Scientology parents would sign their infants away to caregivers, and they take them right into a separate room and just leave them there. Not only that, they can also be taken out of hospitals and straight into those rooms with other infants. Then they are put into cribs and just left there, practically neglecting them. And when they do, and then when they are taken care of, it's usually by other children, like teenagers and children that are under the age of 10. Then they are eventually left there in their own pool of urine. Those infants are neglected the majority of the time. Plus, parents are sent there, send their parent usually, and plus, parents usually send their kids off to Scientology school that would run like a military base. Those schools also use corporate punishment if those kids do something wrong. And even if they don't do something wrong, they would treat them like dirt anyway. Because that's what one of the schools like Scientology does. And there are abusive institutions out there in the world that parents have no idea what they're getting their kids into. They would, and also in Scientology, they would view small children as adults in a little person's body. Scientology would always indoctrinate those kids with the ideology that results in those kids ideology that would program them as like robots, resulting all in result those kids eventually exit a school that has no educational value and just run away. Usually, it's a ranch that is disguised as a school, which would be a labor camp for kids. And it's really not a real school because by law, they have to have knowledge that there's even a that that there is a school by a certain name, and if they don't have any idea, they can't be open. They have to have some kind of knowledge that they're there. Then they would be put to work in those ranches every time a child, and plus every time a child would slave away at those camps, according to Natalie Webster, David is putting on a designer outfit, a two-piece suit. According to Jenna Miscavige, she said she would work 20 hours a day and she would spend a majority of the time away from her parents. She addressed addressed the police chief at a police commission meeting that was open to the community and told them. Will they do anything? Who knows? Because for years they've been doing that and law enforcement hasn't done anything yet. And even if they know it, it's not on record. Or if it is on in record, they're locked away. Because some of them did say that they did report it and they did file it, but they don't want to say it. Each and every child at that school was forced into manual labor. And all in all, parents would be away from those kids for years because their parents were in another state working. As a result, is the reason why they're there in the first place. And if they are there with them, they would spend a total of 45 minutes, and that would be at dinner. Then they would go back to work working for Scientology. They would be working 10 to 15 hours a day shifts, and they don't spend enough time with those kids of theirs. And to top it off, they don't even make enough money to even support those kids. So they usually have to work 2 jobs to support him. So a child would spend their entire childhood in poverty. So their parents sometimes work, yeah, they would work these jobs, and to top it off, they're working 15 hours a day in Scientology as slave labor, only getting paid 50 bucks. They don't pay them enough at slave labor, and they're usually being trafficked. So that's why they're in those other states. Then by the time they're 6, they would get sex checked, and some of those parents just have them do it anyway, no matter how bad or how good any question is, because they are programmed to let Scientology ask inappropriate questions with those kids. They would ask them adult questions. When people are set checking them, they would ask questions that's usually uncomfortable. Little did they know they would be audited, and he or she would be hooked up to an e-meter while asking those questions. And it would usually take hours, and it would be about 200 questions. Not short ones, 200. The person that can be asking these questions could be a child or an adult. And usually, if it's an adult, they would ask they would ask adult-like questions, and sometimes they would assault them. And some of them, if they're violent, they would end up abusing a child. If it's an adult, and if they go to Scientology, the head if they go to their management or to OSA, Office of Special Affairs, they don't help those kids. They're gonna tell them, "Well, you know what? You must have done something wrong in a previous life to deserve it." That's what they usually tell them. And usually some of them are smart enough to take off and go to the proper authorities. And when they do, some of them don't do it because they're in Scientology's pocket and won't do anything, and would send them back to their parents. Scientology will spend that time getting law enforcement to work for them so they can look the other way while they are abusing these kids. And usually they would spend time keeping children from going to law enforcement. And this is through brainwashing. They would brainwash some of those kids, and then if they come out of it and see it as wrong, they would take off and report them to law enforcement, and Usually, Scientology would donate money to unions and get these police officers job while they're off duty, and usually it was right on YouTube. They were in uniform. They are not supposed to be in uniform when working outside of the poli in their departments, because if they're in uniform and there's an emergency and they don't help them, well, they're supposed to help them if there's trouble, even if they're off duty. Scientology pretty much would get some of those police officers to look the other way, as mentioning, because of all these things that they do for them, like fundraisers, donating money to whatever it is they need. But finally, if a parent takes notice at the end, the smart parents would pull them out of that human trafficking cult and get away from places like those, but it would just take planning before doing it, because if they try to leave right there, then Scientology will catch them at the door and lock them in a room, because that's what they do. Then ultimately, they would start a whole new life after leaving. And they would start living in life outside that cult. Then, nevertheless, those kids would finally live as a life as a child and not an adult in a small person's body. And they would get the proper education that they would need for their future. And then in the future, when they're grown adults, they would go to college and get the education to get that better job and never live another nightmare again. In conclusion, it would be pretty much up to the parents to pull them out of situations like that. But sometimes they just, at the end, still stay there. And they're not being realistic about it either. Well, that would be a sad story about Scientology kids. Now, if you guys are thinking about joining Scientology with your family, especially with a child, don't do it, because it will cause a lot of heartache at the end. And if they have mental illness, or you and your family has a history of mental illness, then you can be put in danger. You can even pass on, like Lisa McPherson and Whitney Mills. Only Lisa McPherson died on the way to a hospital. She would pass 4 hospitals on the route to a hospital that does have a Scientology doctor. But that will be for another day. And Whitney Mills killed herself. She just couldn't stand the fact that she was screaming for help and Scientology just didn't care. But Just looking at cases like those is tragic. So, if anyone's thinking about going to Scientology, don't bother, because you will end up a casualty. And if your family, your children will be put in danger, so don't even bother. Well, thank you for popping in. Have a great day.